My name is Claudia Marvisi, and I'm head of texturing for Pixomondo. Pixomondo is an international visual effects company, and I mean, is it known because we worked on the original series of Game of Thrones, working on, well, the very first scene dragons on the series. For me, it's a very big honor of being here today, because one of the reasons why I applied to Pixomondo many years ago, it was because I wanted to do dragons, and I wanted to know which company did the dragons for Game of Thrones. And then here I am today talking to you about how we did the dragons for House of the Dragon. Thank you, Foundry, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to do business with you, and I guess we can start. I mean, this presentation is about our texturing journey, but texturing journey doesn't only mean opening Mario, start texturing. It means going through a lot of steps before you can actually enjoy the texturing process, and this is what we're going to see today. And I mean, my aim in this presentation is not just to show you how cool we were in doing dragons, it's just also to show you the challenges that we faced and the texturing workflow that can be applied also to your own projects or to any different kinds of asset. I mean, it's just, you need to scale it depending on the complexity of the asset. That said, I just want to introduce you to our company demo reel that is showing the amount of work that we did for House of the Dragon. So enjoy the reel. So, I mean, I don't know if you all watched the House of the Dragon first season. If you didn't, I highly suggest you to go and watch it because, I mean, not only because the VFX were amazing, but also because the story is really nice. I'm a huge fan, and the series was a great success. What it meant for us to work on this series as a company producing VFX, it meant a lot of time. We worked on the series for 1.5 years, and we got awarded roughly 600 shots that were covering episodes from 1 to 10. You can imagine from this amount of shots that we had quite some asset work to do. And it's not only about dragons. We got to work on 11 environments. 4 of these were virtual stages. Pixomondo is one of the leading companies for virtual production. We got, of course, digidoubles, our 4 dragons that we will get to know in a bit. And of course, lots of props that were kind of like a playground for the texture artists to just relax and enjoy some easy task. With all of this amount of work, a lot of artists worked on the project. We got 250 artists split between the different facilities of Pixomondo. And just to give you an idea, at the peak of the production, just the texturing department, we were 15 artists. I mean, this is quite a big number for a texturing department. We were at a certain point even more texture artists than modeling, so just to say. All this hard work gave us some recognition. We won a BAFTA award for special visual and graphic effects, and we got nomination at the Emmy and HPA for visual effects. So you see, that was a long journey for us, but I think it was quite rewarding, and well, it was a cool project to work on. So now we can start to dig a little bit more into what it meant for us to approach these dragons. And as I said at the beginning, we cannot just go right into the texturing phase. This is where your texturing part starts. You need to start from gathering references and really starting to get the feeling of what you need to do. What are you going to texture? And well, we can start by saying that we got awarded these 4 dragons, and these 4 dragons were quite different from the dragon that Pixomondo worked on the original series, because the original dragons that were in the original series were siblings. First of all, they're very similar to each other, so they were treated like siblings. So there a lot of things could be reused from one dragon to the other. In this case, these dragons are very different. This is one of the first concepts that we got from the client, and even just looking at this concept, you can see the obvious thing. I mean, they look different, they have different colors, and they have different size. So these are just the first 2 hints that were telling us, maybe, I mean, these dragons are quite unique. Fun fact about the size of the dragons, in the Westeros world, the dragons keep growing and getting bigger and bigger until they die. So probably if you see a dragon that is very big, probably is also very old. If they don't die in battles that, in Game of Thrones, everyone dies, so it's very likely. So on the very first stage, then we received a lot of great material from the client. Of course, we got a lot of 2D concept, but we also got turntables done in ZBrush. That was specifically important because we were already able to look at the volume of the dragons, especially also for the modeling guys that they had to model the dragons, and for the concept artists, they could just pick different angles to do paint overs over the dragon. So it was really a very helpful reference that we got. And we were working also with the 3D printed head maquettes. And on these head maquettes that were real props built, our concept artists make a huge work of doing some concepting over these maquettes. And what I find really interesting and was very helpful for us in texturing is that, sometimes concept art is really beautiful, but it's painted. And as a texture artist, you cannot really get lots of information on how the material should look like. In this case, concept artists made a huge effort of already starting to use real animals, references, and scale to bring them into their concept. So for us in texturing, to figure out and to have a better idea how this dragon would really look like was already quite a big step forward. Of course, that was not enough, and that's something that a texture artist always needs to go through, not just a texture artist, every artist, but then was the point of like, okay, we need to translate this concept and this beautiful painting into real life images. So there was I mean, maybe this is for granted that we all need to do our research, find references. Do not ever forget this step when you are getting into your texturing work. I mean, of course, for us was a lot of like reptiles, turtles, whatever. It was really starting building a little bit, gathering the pieces of the puzzle until we put the pieces of the puzzle together. So you see, as I said, every dragon is different, has his own personality, has his own way of acting, of of flying, and that was a very important part of gathering this information and putting these puzzle pieces together to have a better idea. I mean, you need to know the story that you want to tell, and I mean, texturing is really one of the departments that is really important to tell a story. I always say that modeling gives shapes and texturing gives character to your character, or gives personality, and that's very important. So, for example, here you see that that's the first dragon that you see in the series, and she has already some characteristic that you can say it's different from the other dragons. I mean, she was supposed to have a very specific golden yellowish color. She's young. She doesn't have any tearing signs because she didn't go through battles. For example, interesting for this dragon was she was supposed to have some carvings on her horns. These carvings were carved throughout time, so there were younger carvings and older carvings. And as texture artists, we had to figure out, okay, how do we do these carvings to make them look that they were done through time? And our main references was actually to look at the carvings on bark of the tree. If you would go and look at this kind of carvings on barks, and you see like a younger carvings from an older carving, it's really different. So, we started building the piece of the puzzle. And we did it also for the other dragon. So even if I don't go too much in detail, you can really see just from, just looking at it, that the feeling now is completely different. It's different colors, different types of references. I mean, this dragon is still young, but these have more like nervous and twitchy behavior. Interesting for us for this dragon was that it was supposed to have a translucent look and kind of pearlescent. What it meant for us in texturing is that if you would look at the base color of this dragon, you wouldn't find much detail or information there. The detail and information, you would find it in the subdermal color, because that's where it's coming from. So the challenge for this dragon was mostly that the texture artist was working and then, sending these things to shading and really looking forward to see how it was looking once you apply all the effects with the subdermal and SSS in shading. So that was very interesting. There was a lot of forth and back and interaction between texturing and shading. Last but not least, she is our old lady. We're going to concentrate on her today. She's Vhagar. And again, completely different dragon. She looks way more intimidating than the other two dragons. She's huge. And she's she's a grumpy lady, basically. And she has some characteristic that was very interesting for us to figure out how do we translate this into texturing. She has a loose and heavy and smelly skin. How do we translate a smelly skin into something visual, in a texture? One very interesting thing is that she has her own ecosystem. That was, for me, like a keyword that we got from, talking with the client and the supervisor, that you can imagine that she's so old, so big, she's been around on Westeros since long time, that she has a little ecosystem crawling on her skin. So you can imagine like having parasites, having, crust and things happening on her. And this already, like, you start using your imagination on that. It's not that the client gave us the information. I mean, we could go and read the books to get more information, of course, but then it's in your mind. You always have to ask yourself a question and give yourself an answer. I know that sounds stupid, but it's how it works. Like when you start the detailing phase in texturing, it's where all the informations that you're gathering will come in handy, because you can tell a story then. And now we can start telling this story. I mean, this story, we are not in texturing yet. We are starting to go into prop and R&D. As I said, we're going to talk about Vhagar. She was the biggest of the dragon, and the first time that I saw this dragon, the very first thing that came to my mind was, okay, how do we break down a big problem into smaller ones, or a big challenge into smaller challenges? Well, this dragon is 90 meters long with 150 meters wingspan, and having such a huge dragon, it means that we really need to plan carefully and organize carefully before this beast can enter Mari. Because it's true, Mari can handle a lot of polygons, huge models, no problem about it. But can the artist handle that? Can we handle all the technical aspects of it? I mean, what I want to do is that the moment that we go into the texturing phase, the artist needs to concentrate on the artistic part. So that's why planning and organizing, making sure that everything is ready for that part, that it's the enjoyable part, at least for most of us, everything is ready for that. Needless to say, this journey starts in modeling. There was a lot of forth and back between the texturing department and modeling department, and there was a lot of talk about UVs and how to optimize the UVs. Well, it was clear that we were going to work with symmetric UDIMs, and working with symmetric UDIMs meant that we were, concentrating on one half of the dragon and having the other UDIMs that were the same on the other half, so we were getting the other half for free, at least at the beginning. Of course, after a certain amount of time texturing, when we reached some kind of milestone, we were breaking up the symmetry, but that was already speeding up our process. Another important topic was textile density. So I'm a big fan of having always a constant and consistent textile density when you're working on an asset, but in this case it was impossible because, this dragon is very big, and having the same textile density all over the dragon, I don't know with how many UDIMs we would have ended up. So that was also a big part of try to think, okay, where can we lower the textile density? So when you have to make this decision, you always need to know what you're doing. So it's not that we said, okay, randomly, okay, we lower the textile density on the feet because that's fine. No, we made a plan. We decided that, well, the wings were the bigger area, but were always the areas that you would have seen a lot of motion blur when the dragon is flying. It's not an area where you have a lot of close-up, so that's where we reduce textile density. And then, of course, because of the amount of UDIM, I don't know if you can guess how many UDIMs we had. I can tell you we got for this dragon 400 UDIMs plus 1 UDIM for the eye, and it was optimized. It's really important to have a clean layout. Again, remember, whatever I'm saying, it's not just for this dragon. Clean layout, you always need to have it when you're doing texturing. If there are some modelers here, modelers, please remember your texture artists, be kind to them, and make good UVs and clean layout, because we do a lot of painting also over the UVs. If we don't know how it is organized, then it gets very painful. So the model was ready for texturing. That took a bit, but at least we covered some basics that we knew, okay, we're good, this can work. Now what? Are we ready to start texturing? Well, there were still some things to consider. When we started working on this dragon, for me it was clear that this dragon was not a job for one person. That was supposed to be a job for a team of people. So that was the very first thing. Vhagar needed to be shared for, a lot of reasons. But, it could be overwhelming for just one artist, and you cannot guarantee that the quality would keep up for all the different parts. So we split this dragon, and the very first thing was to figure out how do we split the model in a kind of wise way. And then, of course, then the question came, how do we keep consistency between the different pieces? Because different artists are working on it. And then this thing needs to come together. So we use a little bit of, techniques to try to make sure that we were all on the same page. And one of these was using shared UDIMs. So what it means is that, for example, after the artist reach a certain milestone, just to give an example, the artist that was working on the wings would have got also some UDIMs from the body, imported the texture from the body, and started working on the transition between the wing and the body. So, and that was something that was not always happening at every export. There were some key points where we needed to do that. The moment that we were really taking care at these points to make the transition, after it was less and less needed because we were more and more on the same page. And of course, shared templates. That's where Mari really come in hand, because in Mari you can build node graph setup, gizmo, templates, and you can share it. That was a very big part of it. That was part of the R&D, and that's where actually I mean, this is our standard template that we use and every texture artist uses at the company, but that there was more than this. There was more like templates, making sure that we all use the same procedural, tileables, and stuff like this, and the starting colors, because you cannot think that an artist start on a gray shaded wing of the dragon on a gray shaded body. This wouldn't work. We need to start from the same point. And then, of course, the problem of having a uniform review. So, of course, at the beginning, for me, was really important before bringing this in front of the supervisor to always look at the whole dragon. I was not really caring about looking at every single piece, but more like having an overview to make sure that everything was flowing correctly between the different pieces. And only later on was more like, OK, let's have a look more in detail of this or that or that. It was also easier because it was we were sharing the dragon to handle the pieces separately, also in a way that I could check them easier before they were going the next step until the visual effects supervisor. Finally, we can start the core of our texturing journey, because all of this work, all of this planning, as I said, it was putting my mind at ease that I could welcome Vhagar into Mari and still that she would feel comfortable there, and we would feel comfortable working with her. And also in the texturing part, you do have some different stages that you can go through, and we're going to cover this. I mean, these stages, they are the usual texture stages that you would go through when you are texturing an asset. Of course, maybe you would skip some of them, or you would spend more or less time on these stages, depending on what you are, of course, doing and texturing. But that's really like the base of it. So we can start talking about a procedural base. So this phase for this dragon started even before the model was fully approved and the UVs were fully done. Because, well, the great thing about working procedural is that you can easily update your model. You don't have anything baked, so you can then, just work on that. That was also the part, whatever was procedural, that became part of the template that was shared with the other artists. So you see, at this stage, when an artist was starting, because we started with this part of the dragon, and then the other artist came over to keep working on the dragon. So they were starting from this base already. They had already quite a good base to start the dragon. And then, of course, was a matter of figuring out how are the color flowing on the dragon, what's the color palette, which kind of support maps I can already use, well, occlusion and curvature, for example, to get me some free detail, with being careful that you do not show too much that you're using curvature and occlusion. That's what I always tell my students, that, yeah, you don't have to be obvious with that. Which kind of breakups we're going to use, because these are the same kind of maps that the other artist needs to use. So, it was really a matter of starting building this ecosystem that this dragon was. And then this is a little bit in between the procedural part and more the hand painting part. For this dragon especially, we did a lot of surfacing. So we got a lot of nice detail from sculpting, of course, but sometimes it's not always good to receive all the detail from sculpting, because you can add displacement detail in texturing. I'm not talking about, if you have very big scales with some specific shapes that needs to follow specific flow of the anatomy. But for this dragon, in this case, was actually very helpful to go through that, because, I like to think about Vhagar like an organized mess. She didn't have like clear scales except on her back, and then she had like some more harder skin and softer skin, and this was perfect for us to just use the texturing approach here to tile a displacement, but also, and that's the advantage of it, if you are surfacing an asset, so adding detail instead of sculpting, you can always make sure, if you can, to find the displacement map that you want to use, that it's together with with a color map and a roughness map, for example. Because the moment that you use that displacement as a tileable, for example, if you can use it as a tileable, assuming, you would have already the color that is matching perfectly with the displacement detail and the other channel. So that's actually, It brought up a lot of detail. Again, I don't want to say for free because, I mean, it was not, plug and it's working, but that was still already in the procedural world mostly. And in this phase, I want to give you a little bit of Mari tips and tricks. I mean, you will hear me saying quite often that you need to keep things simple. I know it sounds impossible sometimes, but you need to have a strong procedural base no matter what you're doing, and you need to keep in mind that you can always go back to that base that you have. So if you are well organized with it, the moment that you need to come back to change something, you know where to put your hands, where to find your stuff. So you need to keep it simple, and also because you don't want to, overwhelm your node graph with too much stuff, and then you get lost. And of course, it's a matter of starting working on breakups. Even if you start from a flat color, we never want to see a color that is flat. You always need to have some breakups. And in this case, for example, I don't know if you use it or know it, and these are very standard nodes in Mari. It's the oil and the Perlin noise, and these are one of the two nodes that I always use when I need to start quickly to get the feeling of it. The oil node, for example, is great to give you some organic breakups, and it's also great if you want to do hard surface, for metal, for example. So that's a great node. I love it. And then, of course, also the axis projection, directional gradient that really helps you to project quickly images like a triplanar way. These are in the extension pack, and this is always something that it can give you very nice effects also for masking with the axis mask. So you see, I'm not saying that we just use these nodes, but the thing is that you can start simple, and then you can add on top. And at the end, with this, I know that I always get a fair, good result. I can keep working on it, but that's, that's my base. So, yeah, keep it simple. And then finally, we can go more into the painting phase. And if we were good enough before to, making sure that the model was not giving us issues into Mari, everything was fine, we didn't have problems with the UVs, that's the part, that's the playground for a texture artist, and that's where we want to just enjoy thinking about, okay, my biggest problem here is decide where to put a wound, and not think about, okay, I cannot turn the model in the viewport because it's too heavy, or, I mean, of course, I'm not saying that everything went super smooth. I mean, this dragon is huge, there were things, but it could have been much worse if we were not doing the whole planning before. And this is something that you always have to do, no matter what are you texturing. Here was the time to start breaking up the symmetry and start painting more details. So, for example, we were hand painting some of the scales, not all of them, but some of them, adding micro details where it was needed. I mean, you cannot go and paint the full dragon super detailed. We managed to get to a very high level of detail throughout the dragon because different artists were working on it, so they had the capacity and time to concentrate on their part. But of course, here it's something what I always say, it's that when you're adding details to your model, do not put them everywhere, as a general rule. Because if you put them everywhere, it gets super noisy, your eyes look at it, and it's like you never put any detail, because your eyes cannot follow that thing. You need resting areas. You need to, whenever you are adding a detail in some part, you need to make sure that next to that part, you don't put that much detail. I mean, of course, where it makes sense. But what I want to say, for example, on the face of Vhagar, that it's plenty of detail, not every single scale is hand-painted. There are some of them. There is a lot of painting work, of course. But the moment that you put the details in the right place, your eye will look at it and say, oh, this thing, everything is quite detailed. It kind of like you will raise the parts that are less detailed because your details are catching the eye. But then the eye knows where to look. It's not everywhere. And of course, also remember, do not lose the overall overview of your model. So when you start, I think I already told this to some people yesterday at the booth, when you start working on an asset, do not go and zoom in and start looking at the pores of the skin or whatever. Look it from far, make sure that from far you can see how your colors flow, how the feeling is. If you can read the anatomy of your asset, and if the way you choose the colors, the way the colors flow, if they can help to underline this anatomy. So, do not lose the overview. It's not working if you put a high frequency detail, but then you don't have the big details, the big overview. The asset will never work. So always start from far. And then, of course, was about telling the story of the dragon. What we saw before with all the research and information was like, okay, this melody skin, how do we do it? And then you start wondering, okay, maybe I would imagine that she has some very big wrinkles. The wrinkles there could always be a little bit of moist inside the wrinkle, so she could have some gooey coming out. And then we started painting like gooey things. And also, for example, for the scars, that's also a very good example that where you put details, you cannot go and put randomly scars everywhere. You need to have a plan for that. And I mean, we didn't receive information from the client on where to put the scars, but we can make up a story for it. And I mean, no one maybe will ever ask you, why did you put the scar there? But if someone asks you, you need to have an answer. So for example, we concentrated on putting scars a lot on this part. And that's because, I would imagine that here she has more like thinner skin, but that's also a part where she's flying, there's a lot of friction, and that's where maybe wounds would appear. And that's always the reasoning that you need to do when you are planning, especially when you're doing organic texturing. But it's not only with organic, it's also with art surface. And then, of course, all the things that goes on top, crust and dirt. So the dirt, ask yourself, okay, where is the environment that this beast is living? Do I need to make a dirt that is muddy, so like having mud on her, or she's living in the desert, so it needs to be more sandy? So she was living in the desert. At least we see in the first season in the desert, so it was more like going towards like kind of sand on the feet. And then, for example, we decided to add a crust, and this crust came from the idea that she was supposed to have this parasite and ecosystem. So I would imagine that she could have like really like a scratchy crust that it could be, I don't know, leftovers from dead animals on her back. I know it sounds disgusting, but it's really a picture. The stronger you have the picture in your mind, the better you can translate it into texturing, basically. And also in here, guess what? You need to be organized, clean your node graph, because the moment that you reach this stage, what you see up there, it's the node graph for just this part, and that part was already organized. And it was quite easy to work with that, and Mari was handling it quite well. So there could be a stage, especially if you're doing a complex asset, where you cannot move forward on that project because it gets very slow, it gets heavy, and you lose track of what you're doing. It's not forbidden to, say, okay, I'm going to archive this project and I'm going to start from a new one. Once you know that you reach a milestone that you don't have to go back to the procedural maybe that you did, start a new one, import your latest texture, and then keep building on top of that. And that's what actually, it's not only for this dragon, for all the dragons that we worked on, most of the time we need to go through this step. But then again, we are more free to paint without worrying about, okay, there is too much nodes, I cannot handle the node graph anymore. And for this also, sometimes you can really do a lot of things with just one paint node, for example. I know we all want to keep things separate, like your lighter color, mid color, dark color, because you want to be able to, tweak them separately. But you can also consider sometimes, I'm not saying that this is always a good practice, I'm saying that in this case, and this comes with experience, you need to have a plan, but you can just use one paint node to just be free to keep painting. Because for me, if I'm painting, I want to paint, and I don't want to switch from one layer to the other, because I know that the result, it will be worse, because I'm always getting interrupted on, okay, I need to change, I need to, if it's on the same paint node, I know I can work better. Of course, I need to have a plan, because if I'm painting everything on the same paint node, and I know I need to translate this into my roughness map, for example, I need to be aware of the fact that I cannot tweak the paints individually for the roughness. So whatever I'm painting, is it going to work like this in the roughness? Maybe invert it, whatever. If it's yes, then you can go on. You need a plan. And of course, for example, the Mari masking menu, I don't know how many of you use it or know it, because I know that a lot of artists don't know this menu. I find it really good, and if you don't know it, try it out. It's a kind of like quick masking, and you can use your occlusion channel, your curvature, and you don't have to bring them into your node graph physically, but you can paint, and before baking, you just mask it through this menu, and what it's giving you is that you can really tweak it on the go. You bake it, and then you go to your next paint, and you can tweak them again and bake it again, but you are not adding physical nodes on the node graph. So that's also quite nice. And of course, assuming that you were going through these steps and you are able to paint, you just need to enjoy the process. Well, I mean, it's not only about painting, it's also about making a lot of support maps. For Vhagar, we did tons of support maps for shading. I mean, these maps and mask as well. These masks were also used in texturing. So also, again, here you can have a plan. It's like, okay, I need this mask for me to paint the belly area or whatever. But that one, you can already see, okay, I can prep this mask that goes into shading as well, because shading will need that. And in this case, I mean, we worked on a lot of maps. And for example, one interesting thing that we worked on the opacity map for the holes on the wings. I mean, Vhagar, she's old, she went through many battles, and she was supposed to have some tearing on the wings and some holes. This needs to be done in modeling, of course, but that's a good example where texturing can be also a concepting tool. And that's what I like to call it, like concept texturing, because before the modelers were going and pierce the holes in the mesh, maybe the supervisor sees it that like, no, I want that all a little bit more to the left. Well, that's a bit painful for modeling to rebuild that, redo that. In this case, we were concepting these holes and the look for that with an opacity map. There were iteration on how to make it look. And this went back to modeling. So sometimes texture can go also backwards. This went back to modeling, and the modeling team actually pierced the holes where they were supposed to be. And I mean, at the end, also the opacity map made it through shading and in the final shots anyway. So it was at the end a combination. Another example is, for example, up here, there was the thing that because Vhagar, ecosystem, parasite, blah, 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 she was supposed to have barnacles on her. And these barnacles were supposed to be scattered. And in this case, for example, you remember that crust mask, crust system that we did, I told you about. So this crust that were done before the whole barnacle things came up was actually the perfect mask to scatter the barnacles. And that was a lucky accident. But, this kind of whitish crust with the barnacles, it really felt, leftovers from the barnacles, whatever. It was very good. So this is just to show you how much interaction there can be between different departments. With texturing, is really in the middle of an asset creation. So we can do a lot of support for the other departments as well. In this case, also, you need to remember to work with RGB mask. I mean, RGB mask, it means that you can pack 3 different masks, for example, in one channel. So again, it's about optimizing. One thing that I think it's really important is that correct mask values and range. What does it mean? It means that unless you really need to do a black and white mask and you don't have gray areas, and that doesn't happen often, but if you really need to paint a mask where you have like still a range of grays, you need to make sure that you are going quite soft, maybe softer than what you would like, because then you leave some range to shading to tweak that mask. So if they want to level it or whatever, they have some range to do more tweaks because they have more information into the maps that you gave them. You don't want shading every time to come back to you and say, can you please fix the mask? Can you please do that and this? Well, this is one of the most thing that shading comes back to the texture artist to ask, okay, this mask is not working, I cannot tweak it, I cannot do that. Keep that in mind because that can be very helpful. Of course, having the right color space, and guess what? Optimize. Also for the mask, because it's not only about giving the mask to shading, it's about having them in your node graph, making them work with whatever you are working with, so you can really take the best out of it, not only for shading, but also for the texturing process. And you see, all of this, it boils down to a lot of ingredients that we give to shading, to LookDev, and then they make their other magic, and they bring the dragons to life. I mean, of course, then it goes into lighting, and there is also comp that makes miracles, but that's another story. And in here, of course, I'm not saying that we worked on the texturing for 1 month, and after 1 month we went to shading. There, that's your texture, we're done, now it's your problem. No, I mean, it was a lot of forth and back between texturing and shading. You need to know when is the time to say, okay, the dragon is not done, my asset is not done, but I stop and I export, and this goes into shading. Doesn't matter if you are doing the shading also, or if someone else is doing that, you always need to do this. Especially if you are a student, you're learning texturing, you need to understand exactly what a texture does. That's, I think, the trickiest thing for people that are starting to really understand what it means to create a roughness map, what it means to create a displacement, why there is a midpoint for displacement, what's the difference, and all these kind of things. Bringing your texture into shading during your texturing process, starting to build up the shader, it really helps you to see, okay, that's what I need to do, and that's where it's not working, where it's working. This is what I need to change in texturing, because that's all part of your training, your process. And you see, guys, so we reached the end of our journey. I really wanted to share more, but the time is running out. And I mean, for us, working on this project was not just about working on 1 dragon. It was about working on 3 more dragons and tons of assets. And every asset needed to work together. So it was a team effort. There was a lot of cooperation. That was something that really, when I said we were bringing the pieces of the puzzle together for each dragon, and these pieces of the puzzle, imagine that it's a piece that goes into a bigger puzzle, and then it goes into a even bigger puzzle. So we needed to keep an overview that everything was working. And sorry, I want to thank my team, because I mean, I think now it's clear that there was a big team effort. So I really want to thank my texturing team and the whole Pixomondo team, because I think that was actually, a quite intense and enjoyable journey. And yeah, I think it all boils down to breaking up bigger challenges or problems into smaller ones, and really make your plan, organize, and enjoy then also the texturing process or the sculpting process, or whatever your subject is, in a way that you made your plans and now you're free to be creative. So I thank you very much for being here.